Hello everyone, let's go ahead and take a look at compound interest, which is yet another financial term. Now, before we actually go ahead and talk about compound interest, I think it's going to be very important that we understand the difference between compound interest and simple interest. And let's, for purposes of simplicity, go ahead and use a diagram to describe that. Say, for example, that this is your principal. This is the amount of money that you put into the bank. Now, of course, with simple interest, what we did is we went ahead and just calculated how much interest we had. So let's just go ahead and say, for example, here's a simple interest example. The principal is 100, the rate is 12%, and let's just say that we're going to go ahead and leave that money in the bank for 4 years. So in order to calculate the simple interest, we just said that the interest is going to be PRT. So if we go ahead and substitute the values, we come up with an interest value of 48. So let's just say then that what happens is that this is how much your interest is. Now, what that means then is that you have now 100 plus $48 in your account. And this is basically what it looks like. That's how much money you actually have in your account. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at compound interest now that we have kind of an idea of what's happening here. And we'll go ahead and actually take a look at a real example. Compounding interest involves a calculation of interest at the end of each compounding period. Now notice we're talking about a compounding period and not just at the end of 1 year, not at the end of just one amount of time, which in this case was 4 years. And adding this interest to the principal value. So notice that again, when it came to actually calculating how much money we actually had in the account, even for simple interest, it was basically the same. We just take a look at the principal, add the interest, that's how much we have in the account. Now, in order for us to go ahead and take a look at compound interest, we need to take a look at a couple of key values and key terms. Now, we're going to go ahead and say that A is going to be the account balance, and I think we have a clear idea of what we're referring to now with A. P is going to be the principal in the account or of the loan, and again, that's going to be the same thing as with simple interest. The rate of interest is going to be the same, but the one thing that's different is that we're going to be talking about the number of compounding periods. Now, when we talk about the number of compounding periods, actually what we're referring to is how many times, say for example in 4 years, are you actually going to calculate the interest, and how many times are you actually going to be adding interest to the principal that you have. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at a very similar example, simple interest versus compound interest. And notice that some of the values that we have are the same. The principal is 100, the rate is 12, and notice that the time is 4 years. Now, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and make a little bit of an adjustment because again, we're dealing with compound interest. And the initial statement for compound interest is actually going to be in terms of A. So how much is actually in your account? It's going to be the principal times by 1 times the quantity 1 plus r raised to the n value. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what this is. Now, how do we go ahead and first calculate what n is? Because notice there's no mention here of t. It's n. Now, what we're going to say is that we're going to compound this particular principal monthly. Now, if we go ahead and compound or calculate the interest monthly, how many times are we actually going to be calculating the interest? Well, that means if it's 4 years and compounded 12 times per year, then of course the number of times that we're going to compound the interest is 48 times. We're going to calculate the interest 48 times. So n is actually going to be the total number of times the interest will be compounded or calculated. And compounded in the sense that it's actually going to be added back to the account. Now, notice there's another difference here, now that we've got this right over here, which is the principal. Okay, times it by 1 plus r, times it by 48. Now notice there's a huge difference between this r and the other r that we were dealing with when we dealt with simple interest. Now, how do we go ahead and determine this r? Now, take a look at this r. This r, of course, is 12%, which is 0.12. Why is it being divided by 12? Well, the reason why it's being divided by 12, of course, is because it's compounded monthly. So that means then that over the entire time of 1 year, that interest rate that you've received needs to be distributed evenly among those different periods, smaller compounding periods that we have, and therefore the rate when you compound the interest is actually going to be 0.01. So notice what we have then, again, just to make sure that we're clear. The account balance is going to be equal to 100, which is the principal, times by the quantity 1 plus the rate as a decimal divided by how many times you're compounding per year, raised to the 48th power, because n is going to be the total number of times the interest will be compounded. Now, after this, it's a simple matter of putting that into your calculator and coming out with the actual value that you have, which in this case is going to be 161.22. Now, this is what it was like for simple interest. What does it actually look like for compound interest? Well, the idea, of course, is that if you're going to be calculating interest 48 times, then that means when simple interest we only had one I, in the compound interest, we're actually going to be doing that 48 times, which is the reason why you're going to actually come up with more money. Okay, so now, of course, that's not going to represent that very well, but I think you get the idea from a qualitative perspective. Okay, so let's go ahead and summarize once again. Remember, compound interest is another financial term that we're going to use in terms of using percentages. And it's different from simple interest in the sense that you're actually going to be calculating how much money is in the account based upon an original principal value, where the R is actually going to be the interest rate divided by the number of times compounded per year, and N is actually going to be the total number of times the interest will be compounded. So if you can keep those particular values, especially this value right here, this R, and that N, if you can keep those two things in mind, then calculating compound interest is not going to pose any problems at all. But again, we'll go ahead and take a look at more examples in class the next time that we meet. Hopefully you see the difference between simple interest and compound interest. But if not, we'll go ahead and take some questions the next time that we're in class. See you then. Bye-bye.